Let's take some time to explore the ribbon and talk about all the different options that are available to us here. So Excel has put at the top what it believes are the most useful and most frequently used functions in Excel. So starting with the home being what things you want to access right away. We've got here our clipboard for copying and pasting. Next to that, we've got formatting. So we've got our font size, borders, bold and italics. We can change the background color. We can change the font color. We can also click on this here and access the format cells box where we can change a lot of detail. We can change the type of number. We can change the alignment, the font, the border, the fill. We can even protect worksheets, which we'll go through later in the course. Then you've got here some quick access to what we just were in here, which you can also access by pressing Control-1. I just press Control-1 like this as a shortcut to enter that quickly. And then we've got here conditional formatting. This will allow us to highlight or draw attention to cells that meet a certain criteria. For example, cells that may be greater than, less than, or contain a certain value that we want to highlight. This can be very useful in financial modeling. Here we've got the ability to change row height, row column, hide or unhide, and protect. We can also insert rows and delete rows. I'll show you the shortcuts for those later. And then we've got some editing functions here as well. So the home function is mostly formatting, and it's quick access stuff that you'll probably use on a regular basis. Well, I'll show you how to do everything here with the keyboard shortcuts. If you press Alt, just press Alt once on your keyboard and you'll notice that all of these letters pop up at the top here. This is a way of quickly figuring out what the shortcut is going to be. So pressing Alt once, I see that H is for the home section of the ribbon, N for insert, P for page layout, etc. So pressing Alt and then H brings me into the home area. I can now see what all these shortcuts are. So if I want to change the font, for example, I now press FF and I'm inside the font. Using the down arrow, I can select a different font. Next on the ribbon is the Insert tab. Again, to access it with the shortcuts, I press Alt and then N. So now I'm inside the Insert section of the ribbon. Here I can create pivot tables, add illustrations, and charts. Charts is probably the most common type of thing that we're going to insert. I could also insert a hyperlink, which could be used to reference an external website, or it could be actually used to reference locations in the Excel file. So I'll show you how to make hyperlinks within a file, which can be very useful. If you create a table of contents, you might want to link to several different parts of the Excel file via hyperlink. Symbols can also be useful. You may want to insert certain symbols like the delta sign, greater than, less than, a bullet point, these kind of things. That can also be quite useful. Let's look at the page layout section. In page layout, we can control margins, orientation, size, etc. This is really mostly just useful if you're going to be printing the document. If you're not going to be printing the Excel file, then it doesn't matter too much what the page setup is. Print titles allows you to print certain cells at the top of every page. This can be very useful if you're printing a multi-page Excel file and, for example, you want to display the years at the top of each page. Here we can control the view. We can turn on or off grid lines. So this is very useful, I find, in presenting a final version of an Excel model. I think it looks very clean to turn off the grid lines. However, when we're just building things initially here, we'll leave the grid lines on. And then alignment can also be very useful for formatting. So this is our page layout section. Moving on to formulas. Here we can insert functions. This is the same as clicking the FX function here. So really you would more likely click on the actual formula bar than in here, but you can do it this way as well. And you can look by category, so you can have logical functions, time and date, math and trigonometry, etc. And then you may want to just look up and reference functions as well. That can be very useful. We've got here the name manager. The name manager is used for naming cells. So if, for example, we were to change the name of cell A1 to something else, then it would be recorded in our name manager here. And we'll walk through this in more detail later in the course. But for now, let's not use any names, so I'm just going to delete this. Moving on here, we can trace precedence and dependence. This is very helpful for auditing a model. We can see what formulas are dependent on other cells, and we can see what inputs are creating the outputs that we look at. And this will create a series of arrows like you see on the screen here in the example. And then you can remove the arrows when you're done auditing. So this is a very helpful form of auditing a model. On the data section of the ribbon, we've got here the ability to sort and filter, probably being the most common uses on the data part of the ribbon. And then we've got these data tools over here. Data tools can be very helpful. Data tools can allow us to do data validation, which is how we will create scenarios in Excel. And we can circle invalid data if we want to highlight something. So this can be very useful. And just using the shortcuts here again, I'm going to press Alt-A. And then I've got here W for what if. The what if analysis is very useful. We can do goal seek to find a specific value in a model as a result of changing inputs, and we can also create data tables. Data tables are a very powerful form of sensitivity analysis, and we'll walk through that in much more detail later in the course. Next, we have the review ribbon. Sometimes it's useful to run a spell check on your model. If you're typing quickly, you may have made some spelling mistakes, and you can also add comments, which are very helpful. Comments allow you to make notes about ways you've structured the model and things you think the reader of the model should know about it. We'll show you how to protect the worksheet, which is on the review ribbon here, and how to track changes as well, which can be very useful. And next we've got the view section of the model. This allows us to toggle between normal and page break preview. Page break preview will be dependent on the page layout function that we've set, and I can control the page layout here as well. Again, here we can also add or remove grid lines. We can control the zoom. Right now I'm at 100%, but we could zoom out, for example, if it was a big model, if we wanted to see more of it. We can freeze panes. Freezing the panes is a very useful way of locking in part of the model. Say, for example, I wanted to see the years across the top of the model, even while scrolling down very, very far down below the model. What I'll show you how to do later in the course is how to freeze panes in a very effective way. You can also split the screen, which is useful. We'll walk through that a bit later. And finally, you have the Developer tab. I'll show you in the next chapter. If you don't already see the Developer tab here, you have to add it in your Excel settings. So if you see Developer here, that's great. If you don't worry, we'll show you how to add it in the next chapter here. The main function of the Developer tab that we'll use is macro recording. Recording a macro is a way of recording a certain action that you've taken in Excel and then making a shortcut out of it. So for example, if you want to automatically fill in the background of a cell blue and change the font color to white, you could record that action with a macro and then create a shortcut. And that will allow you to have the action repeated very quickly without having to go through all the steps. So it can be quite useful in speeding up your financial modeling. So going back to the home section here of the ribbon, we've now explored the entire ribbon except for the file. The file function is where we're going to go to talk about the settings for Excel. So in the next chapter here, we're going to explore Excel settings and make sure you have your Excel file set up in the most optimal way for financial analysis.